The recent events around Pakistan's general elections have highlighted significant challenges to the country's democracy.
This was one of the more lopsided elections in Pakistan's history.
The legal issues and opposition faced by former Prime Minister Imran Khan and his party point to a worrying trend of diminishing democracy at a time of economic crisis.
The elite in Pakistan have really captured wealth for themselves at the expense of the country as a whole.
And amidst this tension, Pakistan's democratic institutions face a critical test. But what does this mean for the country's future? What role does the military's influence play in Pakistan's political landscape? And how does that affect the democratic process? This is Global Insights by Network 2020. Today, politics, power, and elections in Pakistan. Today, we're joined by Shuja Nawaz, Distinguished Fellow and First Director of the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council. Moderating the discussion is Courtney Doggett, President of Network 2020.
The 2024 Pakistan general election was marked, as we all have noticed, by significant political unrest, delayed scheduling, allegations of election rigging, and it really culminated in what seems to be a pivotal moment for the nation's democracy and governance. So could you just set the scene for us, please, at first? What were some of the major issues that were at stake in the 2024 general election? And yes, why don't we just start with that?
Well, first of all, let me thank Courtney and Brian for inviting me back. And it's always a pleasure to talk to Network 2020 because of the wide range of membership that you have. Which makes for a much more interesting conversation than the kind of echo chamber that one is often confined to inside the Beltway. So I'm delighted to be with all of you, and I hope that we'll have a fruitful conversation and that we'll all learn something, and particularly me as I step away from this conversation. Pakistan kind of epitomizes the truth in that famous Chinese saying, may you live in interesting times, or a Chinese curse, rather, because it has not yet emerged from those interesting times. When we last spoke, it was in the throes of turmoil. Then, of course, the caretaker government was formed, and they delayed the holding of the elections and forgetting the Constitution of Pakistan, zooming right past the constitutional barriers in terms of the elections in two of the major provinces where Imran Khan, the head of the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Istiqlal, had a majority in two provinces, and he told his people to resign so that he could force an early election and get into a referendum on his government. If I could sum it up as a lead for my answer to your question, this was one of the more lopsided elections in Pakistan's history. Lopsided in the sense that Imran Khan, who had been brought to power with support from the military, who had previously never held more than one seat in parliament, achieved a majority in parliament, formed a coalition government that he led, was a populist, and took on an anti-American stance also, and reached and somehow clicked with the youth and women of Pakistan in particular, particularly the urban women and youth. Now, remember that Pakistan's population now is about 240 million. The youth in that are a huge part of that population. Something like 60% of the population is below 35. The median age is 22.8, so it's not even 23 years. And so half that population is young, and they all know or have heard of Imran Khan mainly because of his cricketing prowess and because of his charitable work in building a chain of cancer hospitals, starting with the one in Lahore, named after his late mother who died of cancer. So this was the background. He was brought into power by the military. He broke with the army chief. He chose to blame the United States for planning to remove him from power. Then he changed course and blamed the army chief, and then he went back to saying it was the US in cahoots with the army chief that threw him out of power through an organized vote of no confidence, so that they cajoled and forced and bought members of his party, according to him, and forced them to leave his side so that he lost the vote of no confidence. And then a coalition government of two very unlikely partners, the ever competing Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz group of former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, who had been Prime Minister 3 times earlier in Pakistan's history, and the Pakistan People's Party that was led by former President Asif Ali Zardari, and co-chaired by his son, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. They became strange bedfellows. And of course, the other smaller parties joined them in a rather fractured coalition that didn't speak with one voice. They didn't know what the others were saying. They did their own thing, and they basically strengthened their constituencies, particularly in their provincial redoubts. So the People's Party strengthened its position inside Sindh, and the PMLN strengthened its position as much as it could inside the Punjab, because that was really the battleground for the future of Pakistan. So this was the background. Let me just, if I may, Courtney, just give some numbers that'll give you a sense of what was going on. Pakistan has about 128 million registered voters. And of course, as we know in the United States, registered voters doesn't mean the number of people who actually vote. Many people forget to turn the alarm on, and many people just roll over and go back to sleep instead of coming out to vote. And it's the same in Pakistan. And so these are people who are over 18 years of age. So as of October 2023, there were 128 million. The youth are 44% of the electorate. So they were up to 57 million, which was a substantial increase from the 46 million that had actually been registered in 2018, just a few years earlier. And then this election was lopsided in the sense that the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Istiqlal, PTI, which was the party of Imran Khan, was basically removed from contention as a party by the Election Commission of Pakistan, that said that it didn't recognize the validity of the intra-party elections that had been held by the PTI. And if they didn't recognize it, then the party didn't exist in terms of the election. It existed on the rolls, but they couldn't run on that party's platform. And in a country which is marked by limited literacy, 58% of the people only are literate, all the ballots have symbols allotted to different political parties. And the cricket bat, which was the symbol of Imran Khan, the former captain of Pakistan's World Cup winning team in 1992, was the symbol of PTI, and that was taken away. And so the PTI candidates had to run as independents, and they were given a plethora of different symbols. So someone was a donkey, somebody was a bed, so you name it. This confused people, and the aim was to try and discourage people from voting for the PTI candidates or not know who they were. However, this became a very interesting game of wits between those that manipulated the system, which allegedly included not just the PMLN that was forming an alliance with the military, but also the military itself and the intelligence services that were alleged to have used local police and others in hounding members of the PTI so that they left the party or they disappeared for a few days. And in Pakistan, the term of art that is used to describe them is that they got a software update. So they would suddenly come out from wherever they were. They wouldn't say where they had been for the last X number of days. And they would say, I've decided that I'm going to quit politics. Or I've decided that I'm no longer going to be with the PTI because they were responsible for vandalism on May 9th throughout the country, and they attacked the military, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of the leadership were taken away from the PTI. However, and this is what made this particular lopsided election very interesting, which gives me hope for democracy in Pakistan. I'm preempting some of your other questions, but was the fact that PTI, because it had a youth base and it had women involved in it, they more than made up for these obstacles by using technical means to bypass the controls on social media, on public meetings, on Zoom calls, et cetera, And so they used virtual private networks to communicate with each other. And everyone in Pakistan has a cell phone or two or three. And so they had cell phone-based technology that allowed people to put in their constituency number and which area they live in, and they immediately got a message back saying, the PTI candidate in your area is represented by the symbol of the tree, or the bed, or the bicycle, or whatever. And that way, they bypassed the obstacles that had been created in the pre-election rigging that normally occurs in Pakistan, much more so than on the day of the elections. So that was the background. Social media and the new technologies became what I recall from reading Frantz Fanon's writing about the Algerian War of Independence, where he said, the French controlled everything except what he called the native telephone, which was word of mouth. That allowed the Algerians to wage their war, to share information, to go underground, and to achieve an opposition to French colonial rule. Well, social media and mastery of the arts associated with it allowed the PTI to leapfrog these obstacles, and they actually managed to connect with their people, and they could ensure that people came out to vote. And that's really interesting. Over 60% of the candidates for the National Assembly of Pakistan came out as independents. So they were mainly PTI members, and a record number of 3,205 independents ran in this election. So democracy, I think, is flourishing when you look at these numbers. Even in the provincial assemblies, the independents outnumbered the party representatives who were recognized by the Election Commission of Pakistan as regular party members 2-1. So in the National Assembly, there are 342 seats, including 60 that are reserved for women, 10 for religious minorities. And so on February 8th, there were about 61 million votes that were cast in Pakistan. 6 million more than 2018. But this was not a higher turnout. It was not a higher turnout because the population has increased considerably. And that's the one thing that is holding Pakistan back. It was lower than 2018, but, and this is the critical thing, there were 23 million new registered voters. And that is really what upended the plans of whoever was planning to rig this election. So, for instance, only some 42.6% of the women voters came out to vote versus 51.6% of men. But the increase in women voters was higher than the men voters in this election compared with the previous election of 2018. And so 2.3 million more women came out to vote. I was following the elections through live coverage of the various independent television channels in Pakistan, and there were instances where a polling station had been shifted away from a constituency miles away, and because women vote in a separate polling station to allow them to vote without any hindrance. But this obstacle was created, and the visuals were stunning. You had half a mile or mile-long queues of people lining up from the morning till the evening, women who had been brought there by relatives in order that they could cast their vote, and women of all ages. So I think Imran Khan used this adversity to his advantage in that sense by mustering the vote and by getting particularly the predominantly urban population of Pakistan to come out and vote for him, but also in the countries. Now, just one final thought, and then we can go on to other issues. Pakistan, as you know, is often called a petri dish for conspiracy theories. And so there was one theory that was being propounded, that the army really didn't want any single party to have an overwhelming majority. And so they wanted to knock out Imran Khan from the equation and then subdivide the rest of the politics between the various parties so that no single party would be super strong. That was one theory. The other theory was that the Pakistan Muslim League of Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif became cocky and complacent. They thought it's in the bag. Imran Khan and his people are out. No one will know who to vote for. The independents are a lost cause. And we have the military on our side. So, we'll just walk away with a win. And so maybe their people didn't come out in the same numbers as the PTI women and the youth came out. As we delve deeper into the breakdown of the results, we'll find out much more about it. The caretakers also helped create this result where the independents were the single largest block of voters, people who were elected in the National Assembly, because the caretakers were seen by the general public as being an extension of the PMLN, Pakistan People's Party coalition government. Even the Prime Minister was a relatively unknown minor Baloch politician who came onto the political scene only in 2009 and who was well known for defending the military in their actions against the insurgents in Balochistan. And so he was brought in, and suddenly he was the caretaker prime minister. So that created, I think, a backlash, and it kind of acted as a political glue for the party of Imran Khan, which had come out of nowhere in 2018 with the military's help and come into government and made a hash of governing, particularly on the economic side. And then were turfed out. But because of all these other factors, the people and the youth and the women particularly came out in their support. So rather long answer to your first question, but this will set the scene.
Well, it was a rather big question, especially given, I think, all of the twists and turns that have happened over the past year or so.
Network 2020, we believe in the power of collaboration to drive meaningful change. We bring together diverse perspectives and expertise to explore new ideas and approaches to global challenges. Join us to engage in thoughtful discussions, foster understanding, and contribute to a more informed and nuanced dialogue. Donate or become a member today. Learn more at network2020.org.
If I may, just one follow-up. You've referenced the popularity of Imran Khan, and also, but I'm curious, as you said, he may have made a mash of the politics. So what do you think defines his popularity, or is it more in reaction to the caretaker government? How can you explain the popularity of all the independent PTI candidates?
They were all proxies for Imran Khan. So it didn't matter who was a candidate for the PTI, although, of course, in particular constituencies, it mattered if it was somebody that was well known to them and that they had elected before. But many of those leaders had been removed by the military and by the civil authorities through court cases, etc., and others through this so-called process of software update, where they suddenly felt that they needed to spend more time with their families or that they didn't want to be in politics any longer. So he was a very potent mix of populism, nationalism, and Islamicism. So all three elements which play into the petty bourgeoisie, which is the predominant population group in the largely urban population of Pakistan, which is now arguably the largest single segment of Pakistan's population. And so that was what sort of brought him various elements to come into his tent, as it were. Of course, he won the World Cricket Cup in 1992 when most of the people that voted for him in this election weren't born. And so, that was just a myth that was brought forward and revived over time. But it was these other things. He used very cleverly his anti-American stance, and then he parted ways with it, and interestingly continued to allow his supporters in the United States to lobby very effectively on his behalf with Congress and people people in responsible positions inside the administration. He didn't shy away from that, but he himself never really connected with the U.S. and the U.S. population.
Thank you. That helps very much. And I think one of the challenges of this particular election is that, at least from my vantage point, when one looks at the world through some of the lenses that we look at elections today, there's the idea of the populist candidate, and then there's the idea of the vote rigging, and they often seem like they're on either sides. But in this case, it almost seems like it's twisted around in a very unique way that makes, I think, the models that many of us use ineffective. So thank you for that. I'd like to turn now to the military. In one of your articles, you've discussed the significant influence of the military in Pakistan's politics, really suggesting a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they are involved in the coalition formation process and decision-making, and it could help steer the country towards stability and growth. But on the other hand, its pervasive presence and civilian roles and organizations can undermine democratic processes. So how does the military's influence shape Pakistan's political landscape, and what are the potential consequences for democracy and governance in the country, given the current dynamic between civil and military?
This is a very fraught relationship, and I've, in earlier writings as well as in my books, have called it a misalliance between political parties and the military. Anyone who ends up becoming a coalition partner of the military is always a junior partner. And the reason for that is that the military is by far the most respected and well-organized group inside Pakistan, although their popularity has fluctuated from highs in the 90 percentiles to the mid-70s at times. But they've always been above the 70% threshold, compared with, say, Imran Khan, whose popularity has been in the 60s, 60th percentile, who remains currently the most popular politician in the country. So military also, because it's professional and because it's trained, has the ability to use its coercive power as well as its economic power. And the economic power it wields is enormous because it has control over a number of sectors in the economy and then those sectors have been broadening through the Army Welfare Trust as well as the Fauji Foundation. These are the two foundations. Fauji means military in Urdu. So the Fauji Foundation and the Army Welfare Trust control so many commercial entities and enterprises ranging across the spectrum from banking to cornflakes to cement to logistics, transport, for instance. They own the largest transport company in Pakistan. And this is ostensibly to support the veterans and to provide for their support, but they get subsidized access, preferential access to material, to land, to opportunities, and to contracts, sometimes one-off deals with the government where they are given. So, for instance, a very small, very unknown organization called the Frontier Works Organization that was set up in order to operate in the dangerous terrains of the border of Pakistan with India and then on the western border with Afghanistan, is now one of the largest construction and infrastructure development companies in Pakistan. They are managing and building roads and highways and doing all kinds of things. In economics, we call this the crowding out effect. So they are pushing out the private sector because there's no competition when the military steps into the room. It's the elephant in the room. They take up all the space. So this is the reality of the relationship. Just to give you an idea, they are now heavily involved in making economic decisions in concert with the central government. So with the previous coalition government of Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, in partnership with the Pakistan People's Party, they came to the conclusion, in my view, wrongly, that the only way Pakistan could really make rapid progress and kickstart its economy was to facilitate foreign investment. And in order to facilitate foreign investment, you needed to set up a one-window operation where you could streamline all the mechanisms where when an investor from overseas arrived, you suddenly opened all the doors for them and put all the stamps and signed off and the deals were done and things could get going very rapidly. The basic assumption was flawed because foreign investors look to the trends of domestic investment. And when they see that domestic investors are not investing in their own country, they're very loath to come to a country and put their money, despite all the blandishments that are offered. And so this, what was called a Special Investment Facilitation Council was set up that included, among others, the all-powerful Chief of Army Staff. And he actually went out to the Gulf countries and to other countries in search of economic opportunities and investments and encouraging them, and came back and thought that he'd heard all the right noises from his hosts and said that Pakistan would become soon a member of the group of 20 and then maybe even the group of 6. So there were all these wishful pronouncements, but domestic investment didn't pick up because people were unsure about the future of Pakistan and its economic stability and unsure about the length of time that a government would remain in power, even one that was imposed by the military. So he is on the council. That council continued through the caretaker government and is still continuing. In addition to that, at Army headquarters, the Chief of Army Staff Secretariat has something called a Perspective Planning Cell, a PPC, that is headed by a Major General. This is now preparing, reportedly, papers on important topics for the Army, including economic issues. And it is not unheard of for them to invite leading economists and other thinkers to come and talk to them and give them ideas on what can and should be done. So that's one entity that is now replicating what the civilian government could or should be doing. Another entity in Army headquarters is in the Adjutant General's branch. This is a very key part of the organization and administration of the military. It's called the Strategic Projects Directorate. This is one that manages various economic projects that the military has launched, including one for corporate farming in ostensibly arid lands, which the military has suddenly been gifted by provinces. So thousands of acres of allegedly arid land are given to the military, and they're bringing in foreign partners, and these will be managed by this group. So it's a serving major general. And then there is another economic directorate in the Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate, headed by another major general who is very close, reportedly, to the COS. I rely on a lot of this updated information from within the last few weeks from a friend, Hamid Hussain, who is an expert on the military, and he and I remain in touch, and he's just come back from Pakistan. So this is fairly authenticated information. So this gives you a sense of how much ingress the military has made. In addition, a serving general is now in charge of the National Data Administration Agency, which is the key agency in which all the data on Pakistan and its citizens are kept. And elections are conducted on the basis of that. If somebody dies, if you need a succession certificate, that has to go to NADRA, and that's headed by a serving general. A retired general was brought in to become head of the National Accountability Bureau, and that pronounces on all the cases that are being launched against bureaucrats, judges, government officials, and politicians. So there is a wide penetration. And then within the last month, in addition to a regular 10% quota of civilian jobs that are given to the military, the serving military can apply to and move sideways into the civilian administration as mid-level officers. They are now asking for a 10% quota for disabled military to be given jobs, and they've even identified trade and other posts, trade and economic related posts for them to do. Now, this is a double-edged sword for the military because, yes, it gives them penetration and control, and they can keep an eye on the civilians and the bureaucrats and keep them on the straight and narrow path. But at the same time, it exposes the military, which is a very middle-class, petty bourgeoisie organization, people from humble backgrounds, including the current army chief. It exposes them to the wealth and the corruption of the business world and civil society. And suddenly, opportunities to make money are offered to them that they were not aware of. And it can destroy the professionalism of the military from within. And so as somebody who comes from a military family for generations, I worry when the military gets involved in civilian matters, because then it loses its military edge. And what Pakistan needs is not a larger, ever-growing military with additional arms and branches, but it needs a leaner, meaner, mobile force that will act as a deterrent to anyone who has any designs against the country, and that can keep the peace within the country and not run the country.
Thank you. Those are some rather eye-opening anecdotes about the military's expansiveness. I'd like to get in just maybe one or two more questions before opening it up. You started talking about the military's role in economic affairs, but I would like to turn a little bit more in depth into what's happening in the economy, because it sounds like there are much needed economic reforms. The economic conditions are, I think, as you alluded to, not wonderful, and there's an IMF loan that is extremely critical for the country. How might this current political situation and the challenges to democracy impact Pakistan's ability to navigate this economic crisis and then also work with the IMF?
Well, the first signs appear hopeful. Let me be a little more positive on this. Pakistan is in a deep economic hole. It is growing at around 2% per annum, whereas it should be growing at 6 to 7%. It needs to create about 1 million new jobs a year. It is losing jobs. Foreign direct investment is not increasing, it has been decreasing. Remittances have begun decreasing over time. So from a height of $31 billion a year from Pakistanis abroad, including US, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, it is now somewhere closer to 22 billion. And so, sorry, 24 billion. And so it's going to be an uphill climb to get out of the economic hole that COVID and the floods, and as Stephen remembered, a third of the country was affected by floods. When I spoke the last time, I think I referred to that. The economy is in dire straits. The fiscal situation is terrible. The government continues to subsidize a large number of state-owned enterprises, including the national airlines, Pakistan International, which is now being put up for privatization. There are great losses in the power sector, and the circular debt keeps climbing. And all the government can do is keep increasing the electricity rates. But electricity theft and losses due to distribution, poor distribution, means that Pakistan actually is producing more electricity than it needs, but it actually is getting much less than it produces. And so the energy producers, the independent energy producers with whom the government has long-term contracts, keep demanding more money from the government, and that debt keeps accumulating. The tax system is completely broken. They have a very limited tax base, total of, as I said, a population of 240 million, only 4 million people on the tax rolls, and less than half of them actually pay any taxes. And there was a study that has not been updated for obvious reasons because Parliament won't probably allow it. But in 2013, half the members of Parliament paid zero income tax. So this is the kind of background. And now everyone, including in government and the military, recognizes that the elite in Pakistan have really captured wealth for themselves at the expense of the country as a whole. And this is what this government is facing. The initial formulation of the cabinet is old faces in old places, but the pronouncements are that we're going to change things and we're going to make it happen, and that this will not be a 50-member cabinet. It will be currently a 17-person cabinet because they want to keep the coalition together and happy. And so we will have to wait and see. The first hurdle will be the negotiations on the IMF to see if the current program can be completed so they can get another 1.2 billion, because that 1.2 billion will trigger World Bank money, it'll trigger Asian Development Bank money, it'll trigger private investment, and then the Pakistani bonds on the global market can then attract investors without giving 800 basis points to them and bankrupting Pakistan in the process. So that's kind of the overview. Let me just give you a few numbers without going too nerdy on this. But you know, Pakistan desperately needs to repay its current loans, or to at least pay back some of the principal or the interest on the principal. And so, according to state bank data obtained by a reliable source, they will need this year, between January and June, something like $9 billion to repay. their reserves are currently 8 billion. So they will need additional money, and the IMF money, which will trigger additional flows, will help in this repayment. So between January and June this year, 9 billion. Between July and December, another 4 to 5 billion. And so that's the kind of hurdle that they're facing. Now, the IMF trigger is going to be critical. And I think by all indications, they have chosen a banker with international experience, a Pakistani banker with international experience, to speak authoritatively with the IMF. And hopefully this spring meetings or even before, the IMF mission will go to Pakistan in March, and they will begin discussions. And this will start the idea of completing the current program and then starting a new program where it'll be interesting to see if the IMF actually cuts Pakistan some slack or takes a tough position, which they did, for instance, with Argentina. For those of you that have followed the Argentine story, you had a populist president who was elected who said, the heck with the IMF. I don't need them. We won't deal with the IMF, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, when he came into power, the IMF gave him $6 billion. And now he's doing what Argentina needed to do. So the Prime Minister of Pakistan, who's a smart man and is surrounded by very smart people, is likely to see that what the IMF is saying to them about cutting expenditures, reducing unproductive expenditures, getting rid of subsidized state-owned enterprises, and removing subsidies that assist the rich and targeting subsidies towards the poor. If they can do all that, then they may not need the IMF after all, but they can at least get the initial breathing room with a new program. So the next 6 months are going to be very critical in seeing how effectively this Prime Minister and his team manage to turn the economy around. I'm hopeful that it can be done, and if there is a will, they can reduce it. Just give you one little anecdote. When the Austerity Commission was set up by this Prime Minister in the coalition government, just before the caretakers took over, I suggested that to the person who was responsible for the commission that they with one stroke of the pen, could save 190 million rupees. This is money that is given to all members of the National Assembly, so-called development funding that they can spend in their own constituencies. So this is pork barrel politics taken to the nth degree, where they are given this pocket money to spend just before elections so they can win their elections. And it's spending money. He put it in the list, and the Prime Minister said he would think about it. And then a week later, I heard that the Prime Minister had thought about it and had increased the amount from 190 million to 240 million, because his members of the National Assembly came to him and said, we're up for re-election, and do you want to win the election or lose it? So you have to make a decision. So just an anecdote that reflects how, the hand in the cookie jar is always there.
Wonderful. Thank you for that excellent introduction.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Global Insights. Voiceover host and editor for this episode is Casey Craig, with research and coordinating by Anthony Sipe and Brian Thong. You can subscribe to Global Insights on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your audio. For more analysis, events, and ways to connect with our community, visit us at network2020.org.